Welcome everybody to today's webinar, How to Support Clients Exposed to Technology-Facilitated Coercive Control. I'm Dr. Jasmine B. MacDonald. I'm a Senior Research Officer in the Child and Family Evidence and Evaluation team here at AIFS, the Australian Institute of Family Studies. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional owners of the lands in Melbourne, where I'm speaking to you from. Also, I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I'd like to extend that respect to Indigenous Australians joining us today. So today we're focusing on tech-facilitated coercive control, and this is the use of digital media technologies to coercively control a current or former intimate partner, but also children as well, and we'll unpack the difference there in our webinar today. In tech-facilitated coercive control, technology is a means to extend perpetrators' ability to monitor and maintain surveillance, harass, threaten, and shame victim survivors, to manipulate their social relationships, and to ensure compliance with demands. So today we're going to discuss international research, literature on tech-facilitated coercive control. We're going to draw on our own AIFS evidence synthesis in this space, as well as have original research exploration that's been conducted by Dr. Evita March. Evita is a senior lecturer of cyber psychology at Federation University. And one of her areas of expertise is online intimate partner violence, including cyber stalking and cyber dating abuse, amongst other things. So welcome, Evita. Thank you for joining us. The first practice issue that we're going to unpack today is supporting young people experiencing tech-facilitated coercive control. Guiding us in that discussion, we have Niamh O'Connor. Niamh is currently a counsellor with the Therapeutic Services team at Relationships Australia, Canberra and region. Her previous role was group facilitator for the Got Your Back program, which is a program for young people aged 12 to 25 who've been impacted by family and domestic violence. So welcome, Niamh. And then finally, we want to unpack this aspect of the requirement increasingly for services to provide some support in an online context, because this creates a kind of unique risk for victim survivors of tech-facilitated coercive control. So to unpack this issue, we're joined by Kristen Pohl, from the Regional Services Manager at Better Place Australia. So Kristen has managed the delivery of family and children counselling services, as well as family dispute resolution. She has a particular interest in the impact of tech in the context of family violence. So welcome, Kristen. Thanks for joining us. It's lovely to have the three of you here. So for those of you joining us for the webinar today, we've used the registration questions that you've sent through to develop the focus of our discussion today. And broadly, there was a really nice overlap in the kinds of things that you're interested and wanted to know about with what we were already planning to discuss. So we've made some tweaks along the way to make sure that it reflects what you're interested in. And we want to acknowledge as well the particular appreciation that we have for the role of people with lived experience and practitioners with lived experience, the role that you play in advocacy and the development of practice approaches. So thank you. Okay, now what you want to hear actually from our esteemed guests here today. If it's okay, Evita, I'd really like to start with you. So I remember when we were first having discussions around this topic, you mentioned that the research space is muddy. And I thought that might be a really nice place for us to start. What do you mean by that, and what should people be thinking about?
Thanks, Jazz. So technology-facilitated coercive control, wherein coercion and abuse are enacted via new technologies such as social media and smartphones, is still an emerging field of research. And technology-facilitated coercive control often co-occurs and shares a reciprocal relationship with offline or face-to-face forms of coercive control. Now, research has largely explored both online and offline coercive controls simultaneously, and this is where it gets a bit muddy. By exploring these two forms simultaneously, it is somewhat difficult to then discuss the research on technology-facilitated coercive control without referring to the broader coercive control literature. So that technology-facilitated form has largely been captured in the broader coercive control literature. So the research is somewhat muddy and unclear, as definitions and measurement of coercive control vary considerably. And to give you an idea of just how much variation exists, one study identified 22 different measures of coercive control in the literature. That means that in the research, coercive control is being defined and measured in many different ways. 22 different ways to be exact, and that's just what we know of. And this is problematic for researchers, as such variability impacts the consistency and validity of findings. So there's a range of limitations facing researchers of technology-facilitated coercive control. Ideally, identifying potential risk factors of this behaviour occurring in relationships would assist tremendously in developing early intervention and prevention programs. But this can be really challenging as we are assessing a covert behaviour that people may not be particularly honest about either perpetrating or experiencing. So this further compounds the fact that even some people might not even be aware that the behaviour they're experiencing is coercive control. So the research, to summarise, is muddy because of variabilities in definition, variability in measurement, but then variability in people even identifying their experience.
It's really it's interesting and therefore kind of challenging for listeners then, especially those of us that might be new to this space, 22 different definitions. I want to come back to some of those challenges, but I want to kind of throw to you then from a positive perspective, that means there's a lot of opportunity, right? What do you see as some key areas for opportunity here?
It does mean that there is a great amount of opportunity, and I think one of the best opportunities there is by subsuming technology-facilitated coercive control in the broader literature. Whilst that might be problematic and perhaps obscure and muddy direct observation of technology-facilitated coercive control, that means that there's a lot of research to be done. So research is still compiling a comprehensive understanding of how abusers use technology to coerce and control their victim survivors. Now, some understanding has been built. For example, the power and control wheel used by practitioners to understand and identify intimate partner violence has been adopted for technology-facilitated intimate partner violence, including examples of online coercive control. And Jazz, I'd just like to flag with the audience that an example of that wheel is supplied as one of the handouts, so the audience can refer to that. Now, one opportunity for research is to use this technology-facilitated power and control wheel as a guide when exploring online forms of coercive control. And this could assist the development of a reliable and valid measure of coercive control that's adopted widely by researchers. Other opportunities include further building the psychological profile of who is likely to perpetrate technology-facilitated coercive control and who is likely to be at risk of experiencing such abuse. For example, in collaboration with a research student this year, we found that insecure forms of attachment styles and dysregulation of emotions were associated with greater perpetration of coercive control. So a good opportunity for future research is to actually take findings regarding perpetration and experience of coercive control and extrapolate that to the online environment. Does it look the same? So such findings could be reassessed in relation to technology. Another direction for research in this area is dyad reports. Typically, research exploring abuse in relationships may focus on either the perpetrator or the victim survivor's experience. And dyad reports from both parties, so both those who may perpetrate the technology facilitated coercive control, but also the victim survivors, would provide a more comprehensive picture of the experience.
It's really interesting. And I think we need to make sure that we're doing that in terms of responsibility, right? We don't want to just focus on victim survivors. And that means that any implications drawn from this is just focused on them instead of placing responsibility on perpetrators. So that's a really interesting point. What else do you think are the, kind of key things you'd point out for intrepid explorers in this space?
Ooh, good question. So
Broad
there
one.
are a
Apologies.
few. There are. That's all right. There are a few recommendations that I would take. So firstly, I am also going to highlight for intrepid explorers that, and you've just noted yourself, Jazz, it is really important actually to not just focus on the experience of victim survivors as well, but to get a more comprehensive understanding, both those experience it, but also those who may engage in the behavior, and even for different age cohorts may not be necessarily aware of what their behavior they are perpetrating. And I think Neem will talk perhaps a bit more about different age cohorts. So some guides for intrepid explorers, perhaps challenges. Firstly, to ensure some level of consistency in approaches, I recommend awareness of the 3 facets of online and offline coercive control as identified by research. So the first facet of online and offline coercive control is that the behavior is intentional. And so that intentionality, that they are intending to engage in the behavior, that is an important component. The second facet is that there is a negative perception of the behavior by the victim survivor. And thirdly, the abuser is able to obtain that control through deployment of a credible threat. So the threat that they make, that coercion threat, is credible. It's also really important to be aware that coercive control may not present as a singular incident. Coercive control and technology facilitated coercive control, is a pervasive pattern of behavior. And so only looking for singular incidents of abuse that occurs online will narrow the scope of research and the scope of the full experience. Further, intrepid explorers should also be aware that technology facilitated coercive control may differ across diverse groups, such as age, culturally and linguistically diverse groups, and gender identity diverse groups. So for example, we cannot assume that the experience of technology facilitated coercive control is the same across age cohorts. It's very likely that adolescents and emerging adults enact and experience different technology forms of coercive control compared to their older adult counterparts.
And these are really important points, Evita, because these kind of diverse groups are yet to adequately be explored in research, like you're saying. So perhaps this is something that we'll unpack a little bit. Absolutely, that the experience for young people compared to adults, but it is, an ongoing discussion. I think we need to learn from practice wisdom and start exploring that more in research. Okay, amazing. Thank you for getting us started. There's already a lot that's quite meaty there. And so I want to take this chance to throw to our 2 practitioners, Niamh and Kristen, and just get you to reflect in terms of that setup that Evita's done for us with research. Maybe starting with you first, Niamh. How does that kind of sit with your experience in practice of what tech-facilitated coercive control looks like, or some of the key issues?
Thanks, Jazz, and thanks, Evita, for that really good setup and kind of grounding us in the research. I think that the kind of practice experience that I have of seeing technology facilitated coercive control play out is very much in line with what Evita was talking about in terms of the co-occurrence of technology facilitated coercive control and a broader pattern of coercive control and other domestic and family violence kind of tactics used by a perpetrator. So when we're thinking about technology facilitated coercive control and what you'll see in practice, you won't just see behavior limited to the online environment, you'll see that behavior extend into face-to-face interactions as well. But knowing that, I guess seeing technology as a vehicle for coercive control is important. So it allows that coercive control and that kind of influence of the perpetrator to become significantly more pervasive and difficult to escape for the victim survivor. So being online allows such greater access to victim survivors and makes it very difficult for victim survivors to kind of escape that pattern of control. So I think in terms of practice, it's really important that we're putting that lens of the online world onto all of our practice and work in the domestic and family violence space. So being mindful that in all of the kind of presentations that we're seeing, there may be an online aspect to this, and asking the right questions to explore that a little more. And then I guess in particular around young people's experiences, which I'll kind of speak to a little bit later, there definitely is that sense of the blurriness of what is kind of normal teenage behavior with their peers and in intimate partner relationships, but also parents in terms of their parents' interactions with them around technology. So what kind of goes from normal teenage behavior into what we may be concerned about in terms of coercive control. So it definitely speaks back to that point from Evita around the intentionality of the behavior, around the negative perception by the victim survivor, and around the credible threat. So really understanding, you know, where behavior shifts from normal into kind of concern for your young person being at risk of abuse is really around those kind of three things, how they're perceiving it, whether it's a credible threat or not, and the intention of the perpetrator.
Thanks, Niamh. The complexity of experience for the victim survivor then obviously translates to complexity for practice. So yeah, thank you for that. Kristen, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Thanks, Jazz, and thanks to Evita and Niamh for leading us in. I guess I'm imagining most of us here today and who are engaging in this webinar are not specialist family violence services. So for some of our clients engaging in our organisations, this may be the first time they've used a service that would ask them about violence or forms of abuse. So they would never have had a conversation about the behaviours of a perpetrator towards them, or the actual behaviours of the perpetrator's behaviours towards a victim survivor. So what could be considered healthy and unhealthy behaviours in a relationship, and what could be considered normative. So looking at strong assessment and understanding of risk indicators are really important factors for organisations. Also looking at victim survivors may only just be considering that how impacted they have been by coercive controls behaviours by a perpetrator, and understanding and developing as organisations supports for those people and what they need to consider in their digital footprint in our current world and what they may mean. And just to reiterate what Evita and Niamh have talked about as well, coercive controlling behaviours are unlikely to have only just been used in the technology space, and talking with clients that there are generally indicators for coercive control behaviours that are outside technology in the real face-to-face human as such world. But my experience in the area with practitioners is that kind of picking up on risk indicators through engagement in clients, important to be out and naming behaviours that are concerning with clients. And some of the behaviours that we could be talking about could be including using technology to track whereabouts, using tracking devices to monitor locations, sending excessive amounts of voice calls or texts or snaps or whatever that particular platform people are using, even denying access to being able to use technology as a means of isolating
as well as sharing intimate and private pictures of a person via online. And this is in no way an extensive list, but just a kind of a touch on some indicators of concerns that we would be addressing.
Absolutely, it's really useful for those, as you say, non-specialists in the room to start thinking about what some of these behaviours might look like. Absolutely. Thank you, Kristen. All right, I'd like us to shift our discussion to our kind of first practice issue and kind of lean more heavily in this part on you, Niamh. Your work has been with young people, and the literature on tech-facilitated coercive controls really tends to focus on adults, and it really tends to focus on the context of intimate partner violence, what's happening in a romantic or, you know, an intimate relationship. But through our work together, you know, the things you've pointed out around the difference of experience of a young person, perhaps within that context of intimate partner violence, but also that they often may be experiencing tech-facilitated coercive control or coercive control more broadly from the parent relationship and how that impacts them. So let's tease those out. Let's start first with your experience around young people and tech-facilitated coercive control in a relationship context.
Great. Thank you, Jazz. I just want to kind of say, before I start into this, that I guess what we'll talk about is applicable to clients of all ages. So, you know, this might be things that you see in older clients as well. So for those of you that don't work with young people, don't switch off. And this is kind of all transferable knowledge and information. But yeah, I will kind of talk about it from a young person's perspective specifically. And yeah, I think just as I said, technology allows the perpetrator of coercive control to create an environment where they're ever present with the victim survivor. So I guess how that might look for a young person, maybe I'll give you an example of a young woman that I've worked with that might kind of help to visualize what this might look like. So this young woman was in a relationship with her ex-partner, and the ways that he was using technology to kind of create that everlasting presence with her was around monitoring her location at all times. So young people particularly do this a lot through Snap Maps, a feature on Snapchat where they can see each other's location. He would regularly FaceTime with her and ask her to show him, pan her camera across the room so he could see where she was and who she was with. So that kind of escalation of that behavior of jealousy and controlling, you know, who are you with? Well, I'm going to FaceTime you so you can show me exactly who's in the room. And this was a feature in her relationship, and a feature I've seen in other relationships, where sharing passwords becomes kind of almost a next step in the relationship, you know, an indicator of our seriousness. We now share passwords with each other as a sign of trust. But obviously in this relationship, that left her very vulnerable to kind of his monitoring her messaging and activity on her social media and in her emails.
Kind of puts the onus on her, right? Like, if you have nothing to hide, then why would you not share with me? Yeah, that's pretty problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess in terms of when she did decide to leave this relationship and did have the conversation with him about breaking up, we saw an escalation of that controlling behavior. So that's, again, something really common that people familiar with working with domestic violence will know, you know, that leaving the relationship time is often time of highest risk and a time where there's an escalation. And it's the same kind of pattern in technology facilitated coercive control. So the kind of tech side, the online side, ramped up then at that stage, the kind of monitoring of her, you know, she would block him on one channel and he would create a new account to get back in touch with her via that new account. He would use a different platform. She would stop communicating on Snapchat, so he would start to communicate on Instagram. So there was all the different kind of use of different accounts and different platforms and fake accounts to kind of monitor her without her knowledge that this was actually him behind the account. So lots of different ways that technology can kind of come into play, and particularly, as I said, for young people, because it's so intertwined with their life and how they interact with each other, it really is something that they're quite vulnerable to. Yeah, so I guess it might be helpful at this stage to kind of extrapolate from that example to kind of think about broader tips for people online today about what they might kind of look for, or how they might work with a client, particularly a young person or any client around this. So I think it's really important to say that nowadays asking a young person to not use technology, or at any days asking a young person not to engage in intimate relationships, is kind of asking a fish to breathe out of water, and it's not really going to happen. So it's important to be realistic about, you know, what young people you know, need in their lives, and how they need to interact with their peers. So technology isn't all bad for young people, but it's really important that we are trying to prevent this by educating young people on the warning signs and on safe technology use. So around what is a healthy relationship, and how do I keep myself safe online, and how they kind of interact with each other. So the eSafety Commissioner's website has some really brilliant resources around guides for parents, guides for young people about safe online behaviours. For anyone getting kind of lost in the world of all the new apps and social medias, they have a brilliant list of apps that kind of explains what they're used for and how maybe people might be vulnerable to abuse on those apps, which is really helpful. And yeah, I guess if you are concerned about this behaviour for a young person that you're working with, I encourage you to kind of raise the conversation with gentle curiosity. So you could even say, I attended a webinar and, you know, I heard some interesting things, and I'm wondering, you know, if that might be what's happening for you. And like with all work with victim survivors, it's very important to be led by them. They are the experts in their own safety. And so it might not be as simple as turning off your location. I know for the young woman I worked with, when she would turn off her location on Snap Maps, there would be this escalation in contact, phone blowing up. Where are you? Why have you turned off your location? What's wrong? And then possibly shift into kind of an online risk. So he would come around to the house to check, where are you? Why have you turned off your location? So understanding that it's not that simple to kind of just switch off from these technologies, and being guided by them around what they know or feel will keep them safe, and supporting them to kind of navigate this in a really sensitive way. And then if they do decide to leave, supporting them to kind of take steps to change passwords, block accounts, all that sort of stuff. So it's an ongoing conversation about your safety online and your safety in your relationship.
So really good points, Niamh. I'm wondering now, can we compare that kind of practice context to what changes, or what do you see different when the tech facilitated coercive control is coming from parents?
Yeah, well, again, this is a space where kind of understanding the context and how power is being used and what the intention is important. So it's very normal and appropriate for parents to have limits around their children and young people's use of technology. Most parents do, and as they should. But I guess the line where the purpose is to kind of control, dominate, threaten, humiliate, intimidate, that's a line that we need to kind of pay attention to when we're thinking about young people and children as direct victims of tech-facilitated coercive control, as well as obviously the pattern of behaviour that this fits into. So remembering that tech-facilitated coercive control doesn't occur in a vacuum. So again, I'll kind of talk you through an example of what that might look like, and then kind of build on some points that people might find helpful as tips. So I'll give you the example of a mother that I worked with through the Got Your Back programme, who had separated from her partner because of long-standing domestic and family violence issues. They shared custody of their children through orders of the family court. So the children went between her home and her ex-partner's home. She had set up her older child's phone, but the children's father had bought a phone for their younger child and had set that up. And a few months after that, she started to kind of get a bit concerned. She began to notice that her partner was new details about what was happening in her home or where she and the children had been. and she couldn't kind of understand why or how he got that information. So we discussed the concerns, and we supported her to engage with a group called the Protective Group. And they are a group that have kind of expertise around online safety, and they supported her to conduct some safety screenings around the children's phones. They were very delicate and domestic violence informed in how they did that, and made sure that that was done without alerting the children's father to what was being done. But in the screening of their phones, they did find that because the children's father had set up the phone under his own Apple ID, he had access to the location of the phone, he had access to the information about the apps that were being used, the time that was spent on the apps, and had kind of the ability to monitor a lot of activity on that phone. So that was then putting the mother and the children, while they were with their mother, at risk of harm. So this is quite a common scenario. We'll often see the children kind of be used as vehicles for surveillance and stalking behaviour, and that is obviously quite concerning because it leaves the children in a really difficult position. So again, tips for people who are kind of dealing with situations like this: again, be guided by the victim survivor. They know how to keep themselves safe, and they are the experts in their situation. So understanding that in this case, when the Protective Group did the screen, they didn't change anything on the phone. They just gave her that information, because changing anything on the phone would have alerted Dad and caused an escalation of violence. So she was given a report that was written that she will take to the police when she decides it's safe to do so. But she's mindful that her children spend half their time with this person, so she doesn't want to escalate the violence so that her children are at risk when she's not around. So she's able to make those decisions very safely, and supporting her to do that is really our role. Engaging with specialist services like the Protective Group is really helpful. So being able to do screens on technology, to do screens of vehicles for trackers, to do screens of homes for cameras or surveillance devices is very helpful. And then obviously educating clients on warning signs. So again, the eSafety Commissioner's website has a good list of warning signs, information that they should know, things that they should look out for, and supporting clients to kind of be aware of that, and recognizing maybe if they're starting to say, oh, my partner has information and I'm not sure how they got it, or, I've clicked into my phone and something strange is happening, suddenly my passwords aren't working, listening for things like that, and kind of picking up that maybe that might be a sign.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting those points, Niamh. And the program that practitioners can access services like Protective Group is Safer in the Home. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. So Protective Group work independently, but they also work with the Salvation Army on a program called Safer in the Home. And that's a free program accessible across all states and territories. So again, yeah, they'll do different levels of kind of tech screening and tech assessments depending on what is going on for the victim survivor. And they'll also support the victim survivors to stay safe in the home by doing things like paying for changes of locks, paying for security cameras to be installed around the home, sensor lights, anything that could help victim survivors and their children to stay safe without kind of fear of any kind of physical violence or threats or stalking around their home.
Right, yeah, thank you. So we've set our research context, and then now we've kind of laid over that there can be differences in the experience of tech facilitated coercive control, or coercive control more broadly, in terms of the experience from within the family more broadly, when it's parents, or when it's in an intimate partner context. And we want to shift now a little bit. You can see we're kind of picking at multiple threads because this is a complex space, but wanting to provide a kind of broad overview of the kinds of things that you might be considering or coming across in your practice. So I kind of want to now lean more on you, Kristen, in this discussion around the different contexts in which practitioners are working with clients. So it'd be nice if we could talk a little bit about your experience. You could kind of set that context up for us of the context that you're working within, and maybe starting with some insights you have in face-to-face work, and then maybe we could shift to thinking about what are some of the unique risks with telepractice as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jack. Jazz, look, technology is moving so quickly that our ability to understand its impact, the new forms of surveillance, new apps that can be hidden and developed every day, that means practitioners have no way of being able to keep up with what are all the possible means of abuse that could occur and could be occurring in the future. And in saying that, perpetrators of this do not need a degree in IT to be able to access means of technology facilitated coercive control. So we now live in a world that lends itself to a majority of the population having access to a smartphone, which is essentially a handheld computer. And the general population, I guess, has had a pretty big crash course in digital literacy over the past 3 years with COVID and our move to different forms of engaging with our family, with services, with other people, which has really shown some nuances around security of engagement in the digital world. So the fallout from that, in the sense of COVID, is that the use of technology with our clients, but also the abuse of technology by perpetrators in this space. So as an organisation of Better Place Australia, we were able to move to, and I don't like to say pivot because that's been overly used in the last couple of years, but it was essentially moved really quickly to delivering online services immediately after we were needing to move to work from home when restrictions were put in place at the start of COVID. We had systems in place that but we didn't really have the understanding of the guidelines on how to immediately deliver a service that was safe to clients. So the work we do at our organisation is varied, but the space that I work in is family dispute resolution. So we work with both parents, we work with the carers of children, we work with victim survivors, and we work with perpetrators in accessing our service. So we look at the mediation in this space, and so we are needing two parties generally to engage in this process. And so the particular work we do in family dispute resolution does lend itself to working with both sides of that coin of perpetrator and victim survivor. So we really needed some stringent and understanding of what that would mean. So the role of a mediator in that space is to assess the suitability for the mediation process and whether both parties are going to engage in that, facilitate. And we facilitate the safe conversation between parties, but also a large part of our role is identifying risk factors and how that conversation, if it can occur, or what format that's going to occur in. So is that a shuttle format? So I guess what else we know is that family violence research indicates that it's a high risk time for people at the time of separation. So we need to consider how we can engage with both parties in a safe way. And COVID has given us some opportunities to increase the safety of parties engaging in different modes of telehealth. So, however, just back to what you were asking, Jazz, around in relation to when we're delivering face-to-face appointments and how we've been able to increase the understanding of how we can provide a safe environment for clients. Previously, if we had to conduct a mediation where there are indicators of risk, we would look at parties attending the site at different times. So someone would come early, someone would come a bit later. We would place them, they'd come in separate rooms, and they would be come in and out separate entrances. So I guess while there was an aspect of a barrier between the perpetrator and victim of family violence, there is still a level of risk that they are in the same place at the same time. So what we knew we could do, sorry, go back, and we knew that at times perpetrators could turn up early, they could try and circumvent the system and be in a car park where they thought that the other person may be, but also their behaviour could escalate and put our clients at risk and our staff at risk as well. So therefore, instead of continuing developing this model of separate entrances, separate times, we've really moved to engaging in telehealth to be able to implement a level of safety for those participating in the process, and lessening the anxiety for those participating in the process, knowing that the other person isn't in the building at that time. However, when we're engaging with a client in face-to-face, and the client is attending even an individual appointment, there were some considerations we needed to make about discuss with them about their own digital safety and what that has meant. So we would talk to clients about who has, and particularly given that often this is a recent separation. So some people may have been separated for a period of time. This may be a very recent separation for some. So who has access to devices or emails? So organisations, and many of us do this, would send our appointment confirmations or reminder letters via emails or via text. So were the clients confident that they were the only ones that had access to this information? And so if they weren't confident, you know, what referrals did we need to work with them on? But also as an organisation, we would need to consider how we would do we need to turn off our system for that client so they didn't get reminder texts of appointments, or did we need to look at other options in communicating with them that wasn't via that particular platform? I guess other things we could consider and have discussions with our clients is around passwords, because when we're in relationships, you know, when we're as couples, passwords are shared, and that is very often the case. And after separation, and particularly when there are risk factors, discussions with clients about passwords being changed is a very important time to consider, and across a variety of platforms, because as humans, we have got a tendency to use very similar passwords across a multitude of platforms, and we, you know, might mix up a number at the end or a letter at the start or a capital here and there. And so they can, if you've engaged that and the other party may know, or the perpetrator may know what that password is, that you need to really think about changing passwords to something that is remarkably different to what you've had before. I guess an example of this in case practice for us as an organisation is that we had a father engaging in the assessment process of family dispute resolution, and we had identified that with some concerns about perpetrating family violence and some coercive controls behaviours, but this became very clear during that session when he attempted to engage with the practitioner in showing intimate photos of his ex-partner that he had accessed via a photo account that he was able to ascertain the password for. And in this engagement of his behaviour, it was really clear that this was an attempt to shame the other party and really discredit the other party to the professional as a mother and as a human in this space.
You see this kind of pop up, especially in the US literature, Evita, right? The use of non-consensual sharing of explicit images like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point to make as well, in that another way the research waters are muddied is the interchangeable use of terminology to refer to what may have a very consistent core. So for example, image-based sexual abuse can often have a coercive control component, threatening to disseminate somebody's sexual images online in an attempt to discredit them or whatever. It is a form of coercion, but these different terms and terminology can muddy the waters in understanding what's actually occurring.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, okay, Kristen, so what about in terms of your service and experience with working in telepractice? I remember when we've had a conversation before, you know, there were real pros and cons of the strengths of being able to engage more people, but then there's the struggles that come along with unique risks for people.
Absolutely, thanks, Jazz. The increased use of telehealth has been a real game changer in engaging with clients. So it's not about just increasing the safety of our clients when being able to use modality of telehealth, but we're also able to increase access. We're able to engage with clients in rural and remote locations. We're able to engage with clients who have experienced challenges in accessing services face to face. So, but what we have has some lessons on how to increase protective measures for those clients. So there's been some conversations we've had to have. So if we're engaging in a client in a mediation session, that it may have been deemed appropriate that they would be able to do that via telehealth, and they may be able to see each other via that telehealth as we can see each other in this modality. But we want to talk to them about, they would be in separate locations. So we're not talking about people who are sitting together. That's not a mediation process. That's, with people who may be in their own homes or maybe sitting with a support service or another family member. But there are some discussions we have to have with clients about some protective measures in this space. So ensuring that whichever platform you're particularly using, so like whether it's a Zoom or a Teams, they often default to the name at the bottom of the screen as your email address. So if the other party doesn't know your email address, you've actually then just presented right in front of them an opportunity for them to be able to access that. So just ensuring that you've been able to have a look at what your screen may look like and change any identifying details in that space. So changing it to simple first name, I would recommend for people in those situations. So also considering the environment that you're sitting when you're engaging in a telehealth appointment. So is there a window behind you? Is there identifying street names or landmarks? If you're concerned, if a victim survivor is concerned about the perpetrator knowing where they are, then just considering the references to geographical locations as well. And so, really simply, as if we're talking about engaging with that person and talking about a supermarket on a particular road, well, they may know that you engage, that's where you shop. So in the context of the work we do, which is quite interesting as well, it's important to kind of discuss these considerations with a client if they, for separated parents, if they have children who are engaging with the other parent via platforms such as FaceTime, which many do, and children can be the unintended source of information for the perpetrator. So ensuring that you've once again looked at the scene behind where the child may be sitting and what's identifiable, what's in front of them, school documents, school uniforms, those sorts of things are really important to consider as well. And another factor that's come up recently that we talk to our clients about is that an increasing issue or increasing access for people using home security cameras. So they're very DIY, they're easy install, they are Wi-Fi, you can pick them up and take them from one house to the next. And so if someone has moved homes, you really need to consider who has had access to that app of that security camera previously, because there are administration rights that sit under those, and unless you've changed those, doesn't matter where you set up the cameras, people could be accessing that information. So these are just a few, and certainly not all, considerations that we would be making in considering the impact of coercive control when using, in using technology in our sector. But I also need to reiterate the real importance of referrals to specialised family violence services, because as service providers, we can't be, and we shouldn't be, all things to all people. We have particular services that we are specialised in, or that we provide, and so really engaging in specialist service to refer clients and direct to those, and direct support to those, I think is extremely important. But just to kind of finish off this little area here is what, as an organisation, we recognise the need for continual improvement on our knowledge and understanding of coercive control and what the technology means in coercive control. So for our organisation, in some ways that that might be what we have done is committing to ongoing engagement and evidence-based training for our staff, ongoing clinical supervision that addresses these types of issues, and really bolstering our service delivery guidelines to address the nuances coercive control brings to the impact of our clients.
Absolutely. And it's actually quite beautiful to see the questions coming through and the responses and the things that the panel is describing, kind of ticking off the questions as they come through. That's a nice indicator of maybe a bit of symmetry between what was expected today and the knowledge that you have. So that makes me happy. Yeah, I think in kind of summary, like wrapping up what you're saying there, Kristen, kind of reflecting across the whole group, one thing that stood out to me in individual conversations with each of you, reading the literature and then the group discussions we've had, is for practitioners and friends and family to have an appreciation of that higher level of demand that's on a victim survivor, to have to be really conscious of all these things all the time, their safety, their children's safety, that we might not always be mindful of that if we haven't had this lived experience ourselves of just how hypervigilant. We might see it as hypervigilance, but actually it's really adaptive to be consciously aware of these things all the time. So really important, I think, Niamh, like you said early on, to take that lens to all the work that you do. I'm not sure if we can really answer this question. Something that's come through from the audience, I'm just mindful that what we focused on is victim survivor experiences, but I know that some of the work that we've talked about here today is also with potential perpetrators as well. And the audience are kind of interested in, what about when we're working with someone who might potentially perpetrate tech-facilitated coercive control, but they're not insightful about that's what we're doing, because that's what they're doing? Because we've kind of talked about it from the perspective of maybe a victim survivor doesn't see or is insightful or aware that something is happening that is problematic. Can we respond to that? Or do we think we might need to point to other resources?
I'll just actually pick up, I think one thing that's quite important then perhaps, and I totally know that for some people, actually I'm going to say two things here then. Firstly, I think the age cohort is quite important there, because I think that younger adults, emerging adults, adolescents at younger ages may perhaps be less aware, because some of it could be modeling, could be peer influence, could be perhaps less aware of the impact. And that's why education, as Niamh talked about, in that younger cohort is quite important. But what's a really important component though of the definition is when you do look at those three facets of coercive control, intentionality is the first facet. Now, it's difficult to extract that because the research has tended to lump all of ages together and also tended to focus at adult cohorts. That's why younger adults are probably needed as their own research. But and this is and I come from the research, the science behind it, but if we were measuring technology facilitated coercive control and we were measured in adults, we would say that there was intention behind it. It was deliberate in an attempt to coerce and to create that credible threat. But that's the research perspective.
Absolutely. Niamh and Kristen, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think echoing Evita in terms of age of the person kind of perpetrating this behavior, and definitely a lot of the young men that I would have worked with would have been kind of at risk of using this behavior intentionally and kind of going down a dangerous path with the way that they viewed what is a healthy relationship and what is appropriate for me to kind of ask of my partner. So a lot of that was, that kind of psychoeducation about, really, for me, it's more about what is a healthy relationship than kind of how to operate safely online. Because when you're understanding what is a healthy relationship, that kind of flows in, just like we talked about, this is online and face-to-face. So really a lovely opportunity to talk to young men about that. I guess if we have an older man who's perhaps got a pattern of perpetration of domestic and family violence, I think engaging more specialised services like Kristen was speaking about, men's behaviour change services and services that are trained to work with male perpetrators of domestic and family violence is really important, because this work is very specialised and nuanced, and I guess really the primary aim is do no harm. So making sure that if it's not an area we're really comfortable with, we're referring out for specialist support.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you wanted to add, Kristen?
Just to add to that, I think that's a really important point, is around identifying healthy relationships, and in the work we do, healthy co-parenting relationships as well. And so we can demonstrate those through resources, through engagement of in education and so forth. And so yeah, putting that visual out there for people to get an understanding of what that may look like.
It's interesting to me because we're looping back now, my research brain of thinking about those levels of risk factors and outcomes. And, you know, we were saying early on, the researchers tended to focus on those individual things and what's a risk factor for a victim survivor. But now what we're talking about is education, meso-family level systems, education systems, you know, broader societal context. So I love that we've looped around to that. That makes me quite happy. I want to thank the three presenters that we've had today for coming and sharing your unique experience and expertise, how kind and generous you've been with your time. I have found this really insightful, and I hope that the audience have as well. I'm sure they will have. I want to thank everyone who's joined us today. This is a really important and emerging practice issue, so we're really keen to hear your feedback, and we really hope that there were ideas and insights that you've picked up on. Maybe it's not all new, maybe it's kind of confirmed some aspects of what you've already experienced in practice, and hopefully you've taken away some tips as well about what you can do when you start to become concerned that something's coming up around tech-facilitated coercive control. I also want to do a shout out to the people in the back end of these webinars, in particular the AIFS communications team and my broader team, the Child and Family Evidence and Evaluation team. Two people deserve a special shout out, our communication specialist, Anne Kyle, and Senior Research Officer, Melissa Willoughby. So thank you to the two of you for helping us with this setup and planning. Alrighty, so we're looking forward to you joining us for our next webinar. This is December the 14th, supporting the developmental needs of children with neurodiversity. And take care, we look forward to seeing you again soon.